amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
Hello, listeners, and welcome. Today my guest is Sue Smethurst. Sue is an award-winning journalist who has written for Australia's biggest and most respected newspaper and magazine titles. Her career has taken her around the globe, interviewing a who's who of celebrities, newsmakers, colourful identities, sports stars and politicians. In addition to her editorial career, Sue has worked on and off camera with A Current Affair and Sunrise, and spent 5 years as a weekly commentator with Neil Mitchell on 3AW. Sue is a best-selling author with book sales in excess of 100,000 copies, specialising in non-fiction. Her first co-written book with Karen Gatt, The Clothesline Diet series, were published by Pan Macmillan in Australia and Harlequin in the United States. In 2015, she won a prestigious Sassy Award for her book with Catherine X, Behind Closed Doors, which was also a finalist in the 2016 Davitt Awards. The highly acclaimed book, Blood on the Rosary with Margaret Harrod, was published in 2018, followed by the epic Australian outback memoir, A Diamond in the Dust with Frauke Bolton Boshama. Hope is Rosie Batty's story of how she coped with the loss of her son and instant fame, and Sue's own best-selling book, The Freedom Circus, is a deeply personal story of how her husband's grandparents used the cover of a Polish circus to escape the Nazis. And of course, most recently, Sue has published Matters of the Heart with Jacinta Nampijinda Price. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you, Rosemary. How lovely to be with you.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Now, Sue, before we talk about your career in journalism and your many, many books, including, as I said, your wonderful personal bestseller, The Freedom Circus, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about your early life, where you were born and grew up, and a little bit about that time.
Thanks, Rosemary. Well, I'm a country girl born and bred. I was born and raised in Gippsland in Victoria, in a lovely little place called Churchill, named after the Prime Minister, of course. And
all right.
Still today, we have at the centre, at the heart of our tiny little town, a magnificent gold cigar that stands tall into the sky. Quite the spectacle, but it was a beautiful little place. My family, my parents were teachers, and the broader family were farming. So we spent a lot of our time hanging around our dairy farm. Was very involved in farming life in what I think is one of the most beautiful parts of Victoria. I left when I was 17 to go to university in Melbourne, as a lot of people do. We leave our country towns, but of course, as I'm getting older, I think what a great place to grow up.
You might go back.
You never know. We might just end up back there, but I think I had a very privileged, lovely childhood.
It sounds as though it was absolutely ideal. So now you said you went to university in Melbourne. How did you sort of get into journalism and writing books, or which came first?
Well, it was a complete accident, and I lovingly call myself Australia's biggest dropout, because I started a university degree. I did 3 years of an arts degree at Melbourne University, and it didn't really I didn't just quite find the place that I wanted to be or where I wanted to go, but around the same time, in my third year, a very close friend got a job with Pacific Publications, or Southdown Press as it was known back then, which was the publisher of big titles like TV Week and New Idea and Home Beautiful, a fantastic place. And they happened to be starting a sports magazine and needed young people from the ground up to work. So I was very, very fortunate to be given an opportunity as an editorial assistant to go in and make, the editor's coffee and pick up their dry cleaning and do all of those sorts of things.
Right.
And at that time, on that magazine, watching all of the journalists around me and the work that they did, it was the light bulb moment for me. I realised this is actually what I want to do. I don't want to be making the coffees. I want to be on the other side of the desk writing the stories. And that was really how my career began. So I think I was very fortunate. I bid farewell to my university degree, much to my parents' absolute horror. left in my third year and landed myself a journalism cadetship with Pacific Publications and never looked back. And I think writing has been a lifelong love.
Now, apart from journalism, and we'll talk about that lately with a little bit later, you co-write many books, don't you? So how did that sort of come about? I mean, your very first well-known book was The Clothesline Diet with Karen Gash. I mean, that's a fabulous name.
Yeah,
how did you and Karen go about choosing that, and how did you get involved there, Sue?
Yes, it was such a long time ago. That was my very first book, and that came about really through New Idea. I was working as the news editor of New Idea at the time and writing some really interesting and wonderful stories all over the place, and we came across the story of Karen Gash, a young mother who was literally so obese she could not leave her house. She had to kind of squeeze her fat around to get herself out the door every day. And she started this program walking one lap of the clothesline in her backyard every day. And she lost a lot of weight and became quite an inspiration across Melbourne suburbs and began little weight loss clubs taking people walking, and it was very successful. And we wrote her story for New Idea, and I got to meet her. She was a wonderful woman, and when I did her story, I thought at the time, gee, we're really only scratching the surface. And, you know, the 1,000 words that we were writing for a New Idea story, we really weren't able to tell the full story. So we began working on a book together. But what happened during that time, which was so amazing, after we published Karen's story, we were inundated with letters. And this was, of course, back in the time when we still had a mail room and mail would come into us. And the magazine was receiving bags and bags of mail every day for Karen, people wanting help, more mail than we had received when
How incredible.
Diana died. So that was really the catalyst. We thought, let's write the book and be able to share as much information as we can. And it was a wonderful experience.
But it wasn't just one book, was it, Sue? It was a series of books, wasn't it?
It was we started off with one, and the first one was so successful, there was very quickly a second one and a third one, and then we went to America and we did a book in the United States as well. And so it really flowed from there. We ended up doing 5 books altogether.
And they're still available?
They are still available, and I still get mail from people about those books, which is incredible.
As you're aware, and many of our listeners, of course, are sight impaired, they don't happen to be on audio, do they?
No, they're not. They were published before
audio.
It really became a thing, unfortunately.
That's okay. So I know a lot of your later ones are definitely on audio. But what a wonderful success story. But your next success was the Sassy Award winner, Behind Closed Doors, and that was written with Catherine X.
Yes, and this was a very similar set of circumstances, the way this book came about. I was fortunate to be put in touch with a woman named Catherine X, who happened to grow up in my town, not too far away from me, and had suffered just the most horrific abuse you can imagine. She gave birth to 5 children by her father. She had suffered dreadfully. And a police contact who I'd done some work with at New Idea had worked on this particular case and said to me, I've got a woman who's got a remarkable story to tell and she needs to share it. And we began working together. It took a long time to build Catherine's trust to speak out.
Yes.
She had suffered one of what is effectively one of the worst cases of abuse known in the world. She was kept a prisoner by her father, and her story began to unfold really under the cover and under the blanket of other news stories at the time. Her father was arrested on the day of the Black Saturday bushfires. So the story had just bubbled away sort of under the surface, and it took a long time to build the trust for Catherine to speak out, but when she did, my goodness, what an extraordinary story it was.
It's an amazing story, isn't it? And it's wonderful that you were able to build up the confidence that she could tell you all the things that did happen to her. And of course, the next book that you did, Blood on the Rosary, is an extraordinary story of how a brave nun took on the church, fighting for more than a decade to bring pedophile priests to justice, but including her own brother, Sue.
Yes, remarkable woman, a woman of such great courage and strength. And again, her story came to me. It was a tiny little piece in the newspaper about a court case. It was her brother's court case, and it was really outlining that she had actually been the whistleblower for her brother's court case, and she had brought to attention to the courts and to the police that her brother, a very highly regarded Catholic priest, was in fact a pedophile, and she was the key witness in that case. Now, to really paint the picture of this story, it's important to understand they were twins. He was her twin brother. They were effectively joined at the hip from their childhood. They were the closest of close. She went into the monastery when he went into the order as well, so they're very devoutly Catholic family, devoted their life to God, and she witnessed him doing some of these terrible things. And it really, she wrestled with that for many, many years. She just could not believe that her brother could do such things, and she questioned what she'd seen, but it was all ultimately true. So she was forced to leave the Catholic Church and to leave her life as a nun. Once she gave evidence against him, she was effectively shunned for telling the truth and doing the right thing.
Right.
And he still, for many years, was still a highly regarded priest until he was convicted and jailed.
Right.
And finally, he was kicked out of the order. But a woman of such courage to be able to do such a remarkable thing and follow her heart, which was the right thing to do.
Exactly. And another woman, of course, who had an incredible story and a tragic story, you told in the book Hope, which is the story of how Rosie Batty coped with the tragic loss of her son to domestic violence, and of course then the flow on from her book, which made her such a household name right throughout Australia.
Yes, and Hope was a beautiful book to write with Rosie. She really is a remarkable woman, and the story, it really tells, I guess, of her experience after she became the Australian of the Year. I mean, we see Rosie on our screens, we hear her speak, and she's such an inspiring woman. But behind the scenes, her life has been very difficult, and few people really understood the trauma and the grief that she was dealing with, whilst at the same time being a public source of inspiration for all of us. So being able to share that story with Rosie and work with her to bring the other side of her story to life was such a wonderful experience and a joy and a privilege to work with her.
Now, you're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald, and my guest today is award-winning journalist and writer Sue Smethurst. Now, Sue, you most recently co-wrote Jacinta Nampijinpa's Price's wonderful memoir, Matters of the Heart. Now, it is an incredible story, and apart from Jacinta's great story, I had no idea, and I'm sure our listeners had no idea, that her husband was such a great singer, as is she. But you obviously spent a lot of time with Jacinta, as you would with all of your people that you co-write books with. But that, of course, has only come out fairly recently. And it's a terrific story. And Jacinta obviously opened up to you enormously, not just about it was totally about her life, the ups and the downs, and there were certainly some downs.
There were, and yes, she's a wonderful woman, and we wrote this book because we wanted to really understand more about who she was. So it's not a political book, and it's certainly, no. I certainly wouldn't call it a political memoir. It's actually the story of a remarkable woman and her upbringing, her extraordinary upbringing, and she has really come from very humble grassroots background. Her family are just the most wonderful, remarkable people. Her parents are absolutely delightful.
Her mother was, very much in politics as well in the Northern Territory, wasn't she?
Yes, absolutely. And this is a family who really came to politics almost by accident because they felt so passionate about this disadvantage in their area and what they were seeing around them, and particularly in relation to Indigenous women and children and the disadvantage that they were facing. And that drove Bess Price, Jacinta's mother, into politics. And it's exactly the same thing that drove Jacinta into politics too, because of that belief that things should be much better than they are. But her story is wonderful. She's incredibly warm, but she has had some very, very difficult times. She was the victim of domestic violence, which impacted her enormously.
Yes.
And she's very, very candid about the impact that had on her. She was a young mum. She was 9 months pregnant while she was doing her Year 12 exams, and literally doing her exams from the hospital bed of the Alice Springs Hospital due to give birth to her first child. She's had a wealth of life experience, which I think really puts her in very good stead to be the empathetic person that she is. She was lucky enough in her recent years to find love, I guess you would say, with her husband Colin, the perfect partner. Colin too had an interesting upbringing from Scotland.
He certainly did, yes.
And he came to Australia, I guess, by accident too. Did a tour, did the typical tourist outback tour through Alice Springs, assuming that he was going to go back to Scotland and live his life, but arrived in Alice Springs, fell in love with the heart of Australia and stayed, and then fell in love with this wonderful woman that he saw singing on a stage one night. Both musically gifted.
Incredibly so, and yes, music brought them together. And I've been listening after I read the wonderful book that you wrote with Jacinta. I listened to on Spotify to some of his music as well as sing. But it really is a inspiring story, and I congratulate you on doing it. I mean, you obviously, as we've spoken about a little bit earlier, you are able to get the trust of the person that you are writing the book with. And that's not an easy thing to do, but very important, isn't it, Sue?
It is very important, and I think that probably comes from many years of journalism where you literally have to walk into a room and be able to extract a story from someone quite quickly, and quite often people are not willing to participants in these things.
Yes.
No one ever really wants to sit down with a journalist and tell their story, so you need to be able to find that connection point quite quickly, and I think I've honed that skill over many years, but mostly I think it's about giving people control over their stories and letting them know that we're there to share the betterment of their story, to inspire other people, which inevitably these books do. They can, when we're summarising them, they can sound a little gloomy. They're not, I can assure you. There are difficult points in every one of these books, but the reason that I've spoken to each of these women is because ultimately they have triumphed over a great tragedy, and they've been able to utilise those skills, that life learning, the lessons that they have learned to be able to help others along the way. And Jacinta is very much one of those. She's had a remarkable life. She's overcome some very, very difficult times,
yes,
all of which is a very rich base, I guess, to be able to go out and advocate for a community.
Exactly. And the other book, of course, that you wrote was A Diamond in the Dust. And that's an incredible story as well, an Australian outback memoir by you together with Frog Bolton Boshama. Is that on audio? I would imagine.
It is.
Yes.
It absolutely is, and it is a beautiful story, and I hope if you're listening to it on audio, you will get the sense of the warmth and the wonder of outback Australia, where this story and her life is set.
Yes.
She arrived literally with nothing, from Germany to the most remote part of Australia, and built a life and overcome some terrible circumstances, and is now considered, one of the queens of the outback for all that she has done.
And the diamond world.
And especially in the diamond world. She was a pioneer and saw the opportunity when the Argyle mine opened up just down the road from her home in Kununurra.
Yes.
She seized that opportunity to sell Argyle diamonds and effectively put Kununurra on the map as an international tourist destination. And if you're going there today, you will see her store, Kimberley Fine Diamonds, a beautiful pink palette in the middle of Kununurra.
Yes.
And say hello. If you go in and say hello to Frocka, she's there every day. You will be greeted like an old friend.
We'd like to get her on the show. We might have to ask you to do that.
She's wonderful. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to speak with you.
That would be wonderful. Now, Sue, of course, you're very well known for your articles in the newspapers and the Australian Woman's Weekly and other magazines, etc. But on top of all of that, you've also written a deeply personal story, the tale of how your grandparents-in-law, Minda and Michael Howards, a circus performer for the famous Staniewski brothers, no, I've probably said that wrongly, I'm sure, but escaped from Poland with their young son and embarked on a terrifying journey through the USSR, Middle East to Africa, and ultimately to safety in Australia. This book, of course, is called The Freedom Circus, and it is, Sue, it's an amazing story of survival. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to write this? I know that your grandmother-in-law was, who sounds a wonderful character, was reluctant to tell that story, but you convinced her, didn't you?
I did, and I only convinced her. I mean, this had been, we'd known about, the skeleton of this story for some time. My husband had told me a little about the family background, but as she was getting older, I wanted my children to understand their heritage and where their family came from. And there was sort of an unspoken, understanding in the family. No one wanted to ask Nana about her background because they felt it would upset her too much. So there was sort of a don't go there, it might upset her. But as she got a little bit older and we could see that time was really coming to an end, it was important to us that we took the story down. So I gently started going and visiting her in her nursing home, and I would take the brightest nail polish for her. There was no point in taking her cakes because at the grand age of 96, she was watching her figure, of course.
You say she was always beautifully dressed.
She was always beautifully dressed, no matter what time you went, whether it was morning, noon or night.
Yes.
Nana had her nails done, her hair done, she had her lipstick on, she had her jewellery on, every piece of jewellery that you could find was on. She was immaculate. She was a very, very proud woman. So I knew that, I had to find a way to get her to sit still long enough effectively to talk to me. So each week I would go and I would find the brightest, the fanciest new nail polish that I could.
Right.
And she loved, and she would sit there and she'd paint her nails very excitedly. And with that, I had an opportunity to speak with her, and I'd pull out the little tape recorder and sit down and say, Nana, tell me about this, or tell me about that. Where were you here? And tell me about this particular story. And for a long time, this went on. We were doing this every week, and she kept saying to me, but why are you interested? Why are you interested? And I'd say it's for the children and whatever. And we went on, and then one particular day she wanted me to have lunch with her and all of her friends, and she would sit around the table at the nursing home. It was a Jewish nursing home, and we had these beautiful little women who she had lunch with every day. And she introduced me, and I pulled out the tape recorder again, and she said to me, but why are you so interested in me? And with one of the beautiful manicured fingernails, she pointed at each of the women around the table and said, what about her? What about her and her? Tell their stories. And it was really at that moment that I felt I had the true blessing to be able to, go hard and really ask some questions, because she wasn't frightened of telling her story. That didn't traumatise her to tell the story. She just didn't think her story was anything particularly special, because every one of the women that were her friends had all survived Hitler. They had all endured their own absolute atrocities. They'd all lost families.
Yes.
she just felt that her story was probably no different to anybody else's. So I guess in many ways it was a tacit sort of approval for me to then really dig deep into the family story.
Exactly, and how a romance, began between a tannery worker, which of course she was, and a circus clown begins. Because, it's a story of extremes, isn't it? Poverty in Warsaw, hunger in a crowded jail cell, luxury in the Moscow hotel, freezing cold in Russian camps, and lush abundance of an African refugee camp, then the Italian one, and finally safety, security and freedom here in Australia. And all the time, Kabush entertained as a clown when he, could right up until his dying days, didn't he, Sue?
He did, and it was a wonderful thing. When he arrived in Australia, and he hadn't performed for some time, he took on many jobs like many migrants do arriving in Australia in that particular generation. He drove taxis, he ran milk bars, they worked in factories, they did everything, but there was a longing in him to still perform and to make people happy. And the opportunity came up, an advertisement in the paper for a new show on Channel 9, a show called The Tarex Show, that was looking for clowns. So he auditioned and he landed a job, which was remarkable. So he was able to perform again. And he performed as a clown on The Tarex Show with the likes of Graham Kennedy and Bert Newton and Paddy Newton and all of these wonderful people. And he became quite famous as a clown on television, one of the first clowns on Australian TV, which is really remarkable. But none of them knew his story. And he'd made a pact with Nana when they arrived here that no good came from looking back.
Right.
We only ever look forward. Don't speak of the past. We only ever look forward. So no one knew their story. And he gave away all of his costumes when he got closer to death. So we found by accident, which was really part of how the story began. The family got a call from someone saying that some costumes pops were in the National Gallery. Would we like to come and have a look at them? We were, how did they even get there? Who had these costumes? Right. So it began a whole series of, rabbit holes that we went down to get to the bottom of the family story.
It's an incredible story, Sue, and it really is beautifully written. And it is such a tribute to your grandparents-in-law and, of course, to all those who escaped the brutality of the Second World War and to all of those, who sadly didn't. I really could chat to you for ages. I can only say to our listeners, it's a wonderful book. The photos, I think, are just terrific and show Mindler and, her beautifully, always beautifully kept, even, when she was going through hell, really. They just sound the most incredible characters, and how terrific of you that you have brought their story to life. But sadly, look, we have run out of time. It's just been an absolute pleasure to chat to you, not only about the books you've written about other people, but, of course, about your family, story of your grandparents-in-law. And I highly recommend that, people do get a copy of that. But thank you, Sue Smethurst. You're the award-winning journalist and author, for being my guest today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and lots to chat about. Has been recorded in the studio of 4RPH Reading Radio in Brisbane for syndication around Australia. But Sue, thank you again.
Thank you, Rosemary.
It's been wonderful to chat to you. Thank you.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.